Welcome to Show Studio. It's our second live roundup panel discussion of the day, and we're talking about Milan, which was actually for many reasons quite an exciting season because there was sort of some new developments going on and some kind of celebrations of old developments. We had some anniversaries, we had some new designers coming in, so it was a bit of an interesting season. So very aptly I've got a set of very interesting panellists with me to help unpick what we were seeing in the Italian fashion capital. But before we start our discussion and dissection, I'll let you guys introduce yourselves, starting with you, Catherine.
I'm Catherine Hayward and I'm the fashion director of Esquire and Big Black Book.
I'm Andrew Davis and I'm creative director of Wonderland magazine.
And I'm David St. John James and I'm fashion director of Port magazine.
Everyone always laughs before we go live, and then as soon as we do that bit, everyone gets very serious. So it's quite good that we're looking at D squared because that'll kind of like get us all laughing again.
So mean.
No, in a good way. I mean, like, because it's such a sort of jubilant show, and I feel like they really played to that energy this season. And I wanted to start by talking about it because it was kind of the first show that everyone saw, and it was the 20-year anniversary, so it was a kind of interesting one. And I think in many respects it kind of sums up Italian fashion because it's kind of, sex, it's very in your face. What did it feel like to see this at the start of Milan Fashion Week? Does it make sense? Did it feel out of step? What does this say to us about the state of Italian fashion? Andrew, what's you're smirking, so we'll go to you first.
I mean, for me, it was great to celebrate 20 years of a label that I've loved and supported over the time. They're making an exciting product, it's selling like crazy, they're opening on Conduit Street soon, and it was nice to kind of see it come together.
Does it feel like fashion to you though, or does it feel like clothes?
I don't think it's like fashion that fashion students go crazy for. I think it's fashion that celebrities like to wear or that young kids want to wear and stuff.
Because didn't they have just celebrated their 50th birthday as well?
Yeah, exactly. So,
which is mad.
Yeah, exactly. But they've reached a different stage in their lives, so not as relevant to young students coming out.
Yeah.
But again, it was, as you say, it's like this fun, jubilant way to just really kick off. And it sums up the fun side of Milanese fashion. There's a very serious side as well, I think. But this was, a joyful moment.
Tell me more about that serious side, because it's interesting to think of those two sides, because it's exactly what we were talking about in London just before this, about how you've got that kind of the young side and that really cool aesthetic, and on the other side you have Savile Row. Do you think there is a similar sort of two polar aspects when you look at Milan?
I think it is a more grown-up vibe when you're looking at the joyful side of Milan. I think London is so creative at the moment, and I don't think Milan has that at all.
No.
Not to be cruel about it, I just feel as if it's a much more established town in terms of what they're producing. So that is very different to how London feels with the street fashion and Savile Row. And I think we'll probably talk about that a little more as well, because there's a sense in Milan that they are, I think, probably looking at London for inspiration in a way.
Yeah.
And I don't even mean that in a sort of cruel way that it's not doing very well. I think a lot of those, this is 20 years, Brioni has just celebrated another big anniversary, and they're all really established and have been doing it for years and years and years. So as with all established labels, you want young blood.
Yeah.
London's got loads of young blood. I don't think Milan has a huge amount of young blood. So I think that will, as we go through these collections this afternoon, we'll kind of see, who's coping with that.
That's interesting that you say that. Yeah,
it's funny because you see D squared now, and it's somehow become establishment when it wasn't really at the beginning. It was something.
God no. It was swimwear and a logo tee, wasn't it? And it's a very, very developed collection now with a sartorial suiting line, with like a massive accessories line. It's very, very sophisticated, layered product now.
Do you agree, David, with what we were saying there about that notion of kind of there being a slight lack of young blood in Milan? It's interesting.
For sure. I think that, you have all the factories, and you have, it's the business and the industry is considered in such a different way that, a lot of the Italian designers would have maybe studied in London and then gone back and done a kind of continued on with the original thing, rather than kind of be kind of a little bit more young or inspiring. I guess there's someone like maybe like Andrea Pompilio, who's kind of being a little bit more directional and is kind of celebrated, but I don't know if maybe he would have kind of maybe got to that position
In
without
London.
perhaps the Canali thing as well.
Yeah.
Then maybe the connection
Yeah,
has
it's true.
helped
And it's
lift
interesting-
both
Mhm.
things up.
Yeah, and you've got Umit Banan as well, who I think is really talented and
Yeah.
interesting. But again, it's that kind of thing where it's really hard. You know, in London, it's like there's so much, isn't there? But then I wonder if it's tiring to compare the two in some ways, because I feel like that was quite interesting this season. It felt like people were really celebrating the fact that they are establishment, and maybe it was just because of the anniversaries. It felt like, you know, there was this kind of like, this is what Milan is, and we're fine with that, and that's great. And I think that was quite interesting.
But I
to
think
see.
the Italians are very clever, the fact that they leave college and probably go and work for 5 or 10
Yeah.
years and work for a brand,
Yeah.
whereas an
Yeah.
English kid wants to leave St Martin's and launch his
Start his own
collection the week
label.
after,
Yeah.
Yeah.
which is great if you've got that energy, but I think you need to learn a lot more than what you've learned in the 4 years at college.
Yeah.
So I think they're very much more grounded in fashion.
Yeah.
They know a lot more about factories and fabrication
Yeah.
and the way that the business works, whereas, you know, the young creatives in London just launch themselves.
Yeah.
I think that's a new thing as well for the
Yeah.
new generation, because I remember being at college in the early 90s, and that's what everyone wanted to do. There was no
Yeah.
kind of, I'm going to set up my own business now. Perhaps we weren't that ambitious, but everyone was like, oh, I'm going to go to Milan. I'm going to
Yeah.
go to Milan. I'm going to go and work for someone in Milan.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
it's really cool.
That's
and I'm
really
going to learn.
interesting.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, I think, because I've been thinking a lot this season about how it's kind of, we've had these in the last like 2 years or so. It feels like it's kind of gone back to, and it's the age of the celebration of the behind the scenes designer. If you look at so many appointments, they are people who've worked behind closed doors and weren't sort of these star designers who hop from house to house to house. They're the people who, you know, we've seen it at Sonia Rykiel with the appointment now, we've seen it at Jil Sander, we've seen it at Gucci now. It's really interesting to think.
Do you think that's something, I mean, one of the questions I raised is maybe to not have a star is easier to kind of manage somehow, or the relationship?
Absolutely.
You know, maybe it's a little bit more straightforward. Maybe we want to just have, you know, if you own a brand, you want to kind of just get on with things a little bit. I think
Yeah.
the star thing is a little bit tiring.
I
Yeah.
think the end of that was Dior,
For
wasn't
everyone.
it? They,
Yeah,
they
absolutely.
didn't want a star, really. They wanted like someone who was great with press, but just kind of took a back seat.
I think there is this idea now that, you know, we talk about it on these panels a fair amount, and I find it endlessly interesting. It's this idea of like the brand always being bigger than the designer now, and I think it's interesting to contrast that with some brands who the brand isn't big enough and they want it to be bigger, and that's the ones who use a star designer. So like Loewe is a really good example
Yeah.
of that, because it made sense for them to have someone who's almost bigger than them to try and push that out. But someone like Gucci, you think, you know, why would they? Why would they
No,
take
no,
it on?
exactly.
It's interesting. Just to kind of throw things out a little bit, what were the kind of highlights for people? Were there shows that really stood out that anyone was really excited by? I want to start with D Squared just because it was a fun one, but what should we talk about next?
I think Gucci is the one that changed everyone's opinion on a brand,
And everyone,
definitely.
yeah, we
I
were all
think I've
excited
never
about that one.
seen- We were dying for something new, but then it was like, and it wasn't necessarily the most mad show, but it was, for Gucci, it was a very much step in a new way forward for them,
For
definitely.
me, I suddenly kind of, I mean, we see a lot of shows in a day, and to see something where you kind of, even if you didn't like it, it provoked some kind of thought about the change,
Yeah.
about going forward as a brand, you know, integrating the women's wear, which seems to be a big, like, you know, or women wearing menswear, like this kind of thing that seems to be, people are wanting to kind of blur that boundary.
Yeah, we
a
were
little
saying how
bit.
many shows, you know, that Prada manifesto about gender, how many shows you actually could have put that on the seat and it would have
Yeah,
made just
yeah.
as much sense.
So
And
it's like
Gucci
for me,
were-
even if you left Gucci and you kind of thought, do I like it or do I not like it? You thought about something, and it's very exciting in our positions to go somewhere and to provoke thought and inspiration somehow. Whether
And
it be
even the way,
negative or positive.
yeah, when they changed the way you sat at the
Yeah.
Gucci show, which has
Yeah.
been the same for like 20 years.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And then suddenly
Exactly
they
where
put
I've been
people in the
sitting.
middle. I know, and it was actually quite nice. It was almost like a couture thing. So you
Yeah.
was thinking, oh, I could touch that. You know, I
Yeah.
really wanted to touch it. I didn't. Went backstage afterwards, had a little feel. But it was almost as if they were like, we're presenting to you in a very, very different way now. So we want you to
Absolutely.
look at it in a very different way.
Yeah.
And use it in a very different
And
way.
it was always slightly more casual, the presentation, wasn't it? Because it's interesting when you talk about the space, because before, you know, you kind of sat in these big tiers either side and the fashion kind of happened in the middle, but this way you were kind of much more involved. It was
Absolutely.
happening around certain people, and it felt,
More personal.
yeah, much more personal. What do we think of, because obviously the appointment wasn't made at the time, even though it was like really heavily rumoured, but it was, I think, about 4 or 5 days after that they announced that
But I think
Alessandro
they gauged that reaction from the press and then went from there about their decision. I don't think they decided then.
Do you not? That's really interesting.
I think because they were the from the CEO down, they were all watching us like hawks to see what our reaction was.
Yeah.
We all had to feed back straight away what we thought about the collection stuff and what we'd shoot and what if we liked or disliked it. So I think that for them it was like a really important moment.
It was lovely, wasn't it, when the studio all came out together at the end?
Yeah, brilliant. The fact that they let the kids design a collection and let them get on with it. I mean, they were in a very difficult place, Gucci, and I think that was the only chance forward, I think.
Tell me a bit more. You say they're in a difficult place, just for the sake of our viewers. Give us a little history.
I just think after Tom Ford, he was a very hard act to follow, and I think, you know, Tom sold sex and love and lifestyle and that kind of thing, and you wanted to be that person. After Tom, you kind of didn't want to be that Gucci girl or that Gucci boy. You didn't really know who they were. The product was still great. They still made amazing accessories, but it wasn't as seductive as it was. And I think now it's a different kind of era, and I think they're appealing to a younger person. I think that they've already got that woman who buys a logo bag in Terminal 5 and goes to Malaga on holiday. They don't need to cater for her, they need to cater for new young people.
And it's more flirtatious and sensual and seductive than it is kind of raw sex, but I think that feels more relevant, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's an interesting one.
I felt the clothes were exactly that, but I have a problem for this whole season, and it really struck me with this particular show is how thin and emaciated and skinny the models were, which I have a problem with when they're that thin.
Do you think it's Saint Laurent effect, or what is it that's causing it?
No, I don't. I think it's trying to find obviously a new way of showing your clothes, and you know, to go down the beefcake road would be wrong for them at this stage, and it's that sort of starving artist vibe, which is appealing, but I just felt as if, and you know, as we went through the next sort of 10 days, as they seemed to be getting thinner and thinner, these models, and then when we went to see the clothes the following day at a re-see, and I think there was talk, I don't know whether they're going to do it, there was talk about they were going to reduce the samples from size 36 to a 34, which is...
Could you shoot that though?
No, we can't.
What it does, and what I think is very clever about those brands, and Saint Laurent have started this, is the fact that you have to shoot the model that was in the look on the catwalk. So they kind of almost style it for you.
Yeah, you can't change the vision at all.
You can't really change the vision, which is kind of, it's clever in a way, but it's difficult from our point of view because you can't always get that kid for that look.
Well, shockingly, I thought, like in Saint Laurent, I know we're not talking about Paris, but I thought that the girls going down the runway looked kind of healthier and meatier than the boys. Which is, and they're not big girls. You know? It's
it is scary, isn't it? But I think it's this thing of I think it's really interesting what you were saying, because it is this idea of trying to show a new form of masculinity, a new way of showing your clothes, and I think that, you know, I think when people first started doing it, there was almost a celebration. It was like, yeah, men don't have to be bulky. You know, this is the kind of fine to be like a scrawny guy. And now it's kind of gone to the other side where
well, there's nothing wrong with being kind of like super slim and lithe, but I just felt as if they look quite unhealthy. I mean, like if they're size 34, then it's too thin even for a girl. I'm like, I sometimes try, you know, those jackets on. I'm like, it doesn't even fit me. I'm a girl, and you know, it's. I think that needs to change a little. That it's quite an unhealthy way to look at clothes in a way. I'm not saying it needs to go on to size 40s and 42s, but definitely not 34.
What's your take on it, David? Do you agree? That was a really good pondering phase. I want to cultivate that. You're like,
well, I'm kind of sitting here listening to this, and I kind of agree, but at the same time, it's kind of a platform to show something in a different way, and it probably won't last. We've seen it kind of come and go, and I think that it's kind of not really encouraging a lifestyle. It's kind of starving artist thing, but I don't think anyone would really look at that and think I need to starve. But then at the same time, makes you question, you know, what's the point of it? It doesn't really make the clothes look better.
I don't think. I mean, I don't think that was their point, though.
I think they just wanted to change the cast.
The point was none of these boys have ever done a Gucci show, so they weren't going to go back to anyone that's been cast before. Unfortunately, you're left with brand new boys who are 17, so that's why they look thin as well.
It was a clean slate.
Why do you think they were so keen to do such a clean slate? Because I know there's obviously, we all know that, you know, the Frida departure was not the most sort of amicable, etc., but But do you think it's an interesting, just what we were talking about before with kind of this idea of rebranding and designer being bigger than a house or vice versa. It feels now like when there's any change at a house, we're seeing a lot of moves towards kind of like really not holding back at all and really sort of going for it and completely changing everything.
It's kind of the nature of fashion, I think, to just flip the coin and go forward with something else.
Yeah, and they've seen
I personally think that a lot more people should build up their collections and develop. So you kind of go, look what's going on there. It's quite interesting. People aren't really given that chance to grow. They have to one shot, and if it's 1-2 seasons later, and it's okay, is this working? Do we keep them? Do we move on?
Yeah.
So I think it's about kind of going, okay, let's just flip the coin and be a little bit more. Look at this, because I think in fact this collection, I look forward to the next one, because I think a lot of mistakes were made by just trying to be different.
Yeah, it felt.
Whereas I think maybe when it kind of we will take that off and we'll make this a little find a way, find its space.
Yeah. And also they probably didn't make. We're talking about them sort of being quite angst-ridden about how we're going to do this. It's got to change. It's got to be different. They had 10 days because they didn't even know she was leaving until 10 days before. Because it was quite shocked. So they probably thought
it made sense for them to not present the. I mean, it's perfect sense. You have to just do something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like some of this was something that they were doing, though. I think it was a very watered down version of this, what they were going to do, but I think this was the basis of a collection that they were working on already.
It would be good to see that collection.
Yeah.
It's interesting though, because I really agree with what you were saying. I felt like I loved it because it felt like joyfully chaotic. It felt like it was every idea they'd ever suggested and had been kind of knocked down. They were like, well, we're going to do it. And there were so many different ideas. And even some of the styling was slightly bonkers. Where you're like, why is it all there? But I kind of love that because, it goes back to what we were talking about right at the start of this discussion, this idea of Milan, perhaps not surprising you. And this was one of those collections where the whole show surprised me, but also each kind of look I was really intrigued by and kind of confused by, and sometimes I didn't like it, but it was nice to see kind of a wealth of ideas, even if some of them weren't the best edited ideas or should have been streamlined a bit. It was kind of, it's quite joyful to see that.
And also to actually go, is that a boy or a girl?
Yeah.
I was thinking that as they walked past me in very close proximity. I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So, you never think that usually in a Milan show.
It's interesting though, because I wonder, do you think that the person who would buy, I know it's what you're saying, Andrew, about pulling in a new shopper, but does the Gucci luxury shopper want to not to be sort of gender neutral?
I think this is for promotional purposes. Totally, it's almost like couture. It's it's not to sell, it's to get people into the store excited about the brand. There's still going to be a great suit for the businessman, there's going to be a fur coat for a woman, there's all the Gucci staples that have always been there. I just think that this is something quite exciting.
What else were we excited by? It's interesting to talk about this idea of gender. Maybe we should talk about Prada next, because that was... I really want to get everyone's opinion on this, because one thing I can't understand is there are some editors who, and it tends to be men, not women who cover the menswear, who are like, oh, I look away when it's women on the menswear runways, and they get really genuinely really offended by it. Do you feel like that?
No, I don't actually. I think it's I think it's actually quite modern, incorporating them. But you do have a lot of women's wear to, there's a lot of women's wear to see and there's a lot of men's wear to see, and it's divided just out of pure practicality, I think.
Yeah.
But I think this is kind of, it is actually a platform for designers to launch their pre-collection.
Their pre-collection.
And that I think kind of puts some menswear editors' noses up. They're like, why muscling into our space? But I think it's really nice to incorporate them. It's I wish there was more. I wished I could shoot more men and women together, but the industry makes it very hard to do that.
I was going to ask that actually, because we are seeing more and more collections where this idea of gender fluidity and gender neutrality are big themes, yet we're not seeing many magazines that kind of thrive as gender neutral magazines. It's interesting to talk about, we were talking about Another before we went live, which was the whole premise of Another when it started with this kind of boy-girl magazine, and obviously there are a few, that's a sweeping generalisation, but do you think we'll start seeing more magazines where men and women are shot together and it's kind of
I'm always trying to do it myself. I find when you enter the model world, it's almost impossible, because it's the whole politic about pages and wear and all this really ridiculous thing. So you're not really going to get the caliber of the casting that you're kind of looking for in the men. But when you kind of do a street cast thing, you have an easier way of incorporating them. But maybe that will change. Maybe this will be, something that will...
The beginning of the next 20 years.
But there are ways around it. we shoot guys and girls together all the time.
Yeah, it's
you have to be very
interesting
smart about the way you do it. You have to shoot a guy and a girl from the same agency, and they'll do anything to get them together on a page because you're promoting the agency, whether they've got to come from Miami or Stratford, they'll make it happen. So I think there are ways of doing it, and I think it's really modern. I think it's it's another way of putting a brand into context for someone to understand. And there's often those people out there that want to be like a guy and girl couple that wear the same brand. I get it. I like that kind of thing. It's like a uniform. I think it's brilliant.
Which is a bit like the collection in a way, very uniform.
But it was interesting with this collection and it's really intriguing to get everyone's thoughts on it, because one of the things that struck me most was how, you know, the manifesto that she put on our seats, the show notes.
Well, the fact we had show notes.
Yeah, it was amazing.
That was amazing.
I felt like she obviously really felt like, when I first got there, I was like, she obviously is so tired of people just not understanding it. But she's like,
don't ask me the question. Yeah.
But she spoke so, you know, eloquently and interestingly about gender and kind of all these different aspects of like why we wear what we do and what's appropriate for who to wear when. But I found it really interesting that it wasn't an androgynous show at all. You know, she kept men's and women's wardrobes incredibly separate. It was almost relatively conservative. You know, I felt like the women's wear was they almost look quite dolled up.
But the women's wear,
very
like,
girly.
when you looked at it closely, like at the Risi, it's like so exquisite and so beautifully made, and all the little bows, and it's quite feminine.
It is really feminine,
which I really liked. When you see it down the runway, or when I saw it, just kind of it was actually quite quick.
You missed all of
hard.
that.
Yeah,
and it was dark.
Black and dark.
I think the palette made it feel a lot more like it was boys and girls wearing the same stuff. But then when I thought that was incredibly interesting, because I feel like androgyny almost feels a little bit boring when it comes. It's not actually that progressive in terms of gender.
No.
Like,
it didn't actually feel androgynous. Actually.
No, it didn't at all. Exactly, that's the thing. It felt very, very. This is a girl's wardrobe. This is a boy's wardrobe.
Men and women on like kind of equal kind of intellectual, you know, placement.
Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
We started having this conversation after we'd seen this, because there were so many girls in this particular show. It's like there was a lot, wasn't there?
I counted.
Was it almost half?
No, it wasn't half. It was like I think there were 42, and then like 20. No, there were 52 models or something, and then 28.
That's a lot.
I actually wrote it in my review. I went through and counted because I was like, "Is it half?" And it was just under half. And I thought, why didn't she just make it half?
Yeah,
but it wasn't.
But Prada's been incorporating women for
it's a long time.
A few seasons.
Yes,
but it's always been like a
sprinkling.
Yeah.
But it was like we started thinking, is this like the new way forward? Are we going to be doing men and women together? I personally would love it. I'd love it.
Shows.
No, exactly. Well, I think it would reduce. Surely it would reduce costs.
I said that. I keep saying this because I feel so vindicated, because I said this at London Fashion Week. I was like, we should all be showing together, and literally everyone looked at me like I was bonkers, like absolutely bonkers. And then Mrs. Prada and I are on the same wavelength.
I'm with you on that one.
But it is interesting to think about that, because, you know, everyone talks incessantly, you know, like constantly throughout fashion about the scheduling problem and how all these shows and the pace of fashion is ruining creativity, and people suggest all these different answers, like people sitting seasons out, etc., all of this, but no one's ever kind of said, well, why don't we show the men's and women's together? And I think that's actually quite a viable way of getting around it, and it is really interesting to think about that. But I don't know how many, I think buyers and journalists do work quite distinctly. You know, there aren't that many journalists that work across both. So I don't know actually how much it would cut down schedules or just make a bun fight for tickets.
Yeah, and a bun fight for first row.
I know, can you imagine? The menswear press amongst all the women's wear press would be absolutely terrified.
But then maybe it becomes, I suppose, I didn't see it, but I know there was a lot of talk about the Raf Simons one, where he's kind of changed the way he sort of elevated the catwalk and everyone sort of stands around it. So it's not so, it just feels much more
I'm quite happy about that,
inclusive, and you can kind of go and see it, and there's no sort of, you're in the second row, and there's none of that.
Yeah, I like that. It's better. I like that kind of dip in and dip out. I think it's really hard to get right, though. I think we keep straying into Paris, but I'm going to talk about Paris because I think there were some really good examples in Paris of that. You know, Raf's was a show. You had to be there at a certain time, and it came and it went. Yeah. But presentations where you go, you see, and you leave. Showtation. But it's really hard, isn't it? Because like Heide Ackermann, I think, didn't go so well. It's hard to get that right, isn't it?
Wrong.
But yeah, it's an interesting one.
But this, I think, was exciting because the menswear was kind of quite simple without downgrading what they've done. Quite simple product. It was like a belted Mac with a 3-button jacket over the top with a grosgrain collar. It's not the most complex of ideas, but it's put together so sophisticated.
But you had these like shirts underneath, that these like kind of, some of them had these like beige shirts that could have been like UPS uniform, which is like kind of quite core huge.
But I love that idea of cheapness that she does so well. You
Yeah.
know, like it's. That, I really feel like that's her signature. I love that about it. You know, I think she either does really ugly or she does really cheap, and she kind of, but in a really clever way. And I think I just thought it was. I loved it so much. I actually probably shouldn't talk about it because I was like hysterical with excitement afterwards.
And it's you know, it's a bit of a cliche to say, but it is like the big one to see in Milan because it's so inventive.
But I always think as well, with the exciting thing about Prada, and again, it sounds quite cliche, but like when you arrive at the venue, you're kind of thinking what's gonna what you anticipate what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
From the moment you walk in the door, and you start to look at the carpet.
That's the weird
because
canapes
they
that
changed
they
the whole
serve,
carpet, they changed the whole set, and
Yeah.
everything. You kind of start to use the process starts before the collection happens. And
Yeah.
that's very exciting.
And
There's
I
very
thought
few
because
shows
of
that do that.
the invitation was like black nylon, I thought,
Yeah.
oh, it's going to be floral print or something
Yeah.
like that. And so she's constantly sort of changing what you are going to expect, which is
Yeah.
the exciting thing, I suppose, about it,
And
always.
it is interesting to think about that because it is one of the only shows I think where people sit and like all through Milan where they try and work out what she's going to do. There's no other shows where you really sit and do that and you're like...
No, models are told specifically not to talk about what they've been fitted on because if they go to
really?
the next fitting and then you say everyone used to say what was Prada to look like and they're like, I can't remember. They're quite...
Just make it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Polka dot, lovely. No, it was a beautiful collection. When you look at something like this, is it interesting because you know we talk about Prada in a very fashion way and how relevant and exciting she is as a fashion mind. But I guess to an Esquire read, clothes like this actually are relatively accessible and understandable to kind of your average guy.
Yes, well that's the thing. I mean, I would say 85% of what we shoot is on real men, like actors, musicians, etc., etc. So we don't have usually that problem that you were talking about, was you've got to shoot the exact boy from the exact show and
Which
the
is
exact
difficult
outfit.
when you're shooting real people.
Yeah, it's
You
impossible.
can't do it.
You can only shoot it the minute it goes into store, which is the most difficult thing.
Which is what I've had to do recently with a musician, and I was just on the cusp of autumn winter coming out, spring summer coming in. He wasn't sample size, so I was like,
Who was that fat musician?
this is very tall.
Oh.
Watch this space. No, but you're right. It is when you're doing a mood board and you're sending it off to publicists for your actors or musicians. Then this is like, hey, let's put the Prada in because you know it looks really kind of the guy's going to go, yeah, I'm going to look good in that.
Yeah.
It's still like quite. I mean, this is like nothing really to do with anything, but still frustrating that publicists, when if you show anything from the runway, go freak out.
Yeah. Really? Do you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely freak out.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's usually a freak out.
There's been
That's
freak
such a
out
shame, isn't it? Because you think that's we were talking about exactly this on the London panel this morning. It's like how I was asking, how are we going to get buyers to put their money where their mouth is with lots of these young collections these young designers where we talk about their collections, say how brilliant they are. And we were kind of talking about, the eye will change and it'll be a gradual process, and buyers shouldn't buy things that aren't going to sell, etc., etc., etc. But you think, if people aren't going to read a magazine and see, that people off TV, people off cinema, musicians are interested in wearing clothes that are it's never going to change, because if a buyer then does a huge fluoro pink sibling order, it's not going to shift unless you're seeing people wearing that kind of stuff. It's hard, isn't it? But
That's our job.
What's next?
Yes.
well, what should we talk about next?
Jil Sander.
Jil Sander?
Ooh, controversial.
Because Jil Sander's another interesting one, just going back to this talk of new appointments, because this was, God, horrible name, Rodolfo Paglialunga.
What does that mean? Is it like long tongue or something?
On the menu. Is it on the menu?
I am never being invited again. Which was interesting because, the women's wear that he did, I think people responded really, really well to. And this one, I found it a trickier collection to kind of like immediately, and it was an interesting one. And he's a really interesting character to move from Prada to this, because obviously he worked as women's design director at Prada for many years. What do we make of this collection?
I thought it was awful. I think it looked
Don't
like...
hold back.
I just think they'd gone through the archive and pulled out every greatest hit that she'd done and tried to remake it, which is not, I think, a starting point for a collection, definitely.
I didn't see it, but then obviously I looked at it afterwards, and I couldn't place it anywhere.
Yeah.
I couldn't place it into any particular sort of season or city or
I found
could have been
anywhere.
a lot of different kind of designers.
Nothing intrinsically wrong with any of the pieces. I'm sure, if you put one on, you go, yeah, I look great in this, but it didn't feel like a collection.
It was really hard to write about, which I couldn't.
exactly.
Yeah, I couldn't it was like I couldn't even pick a piece that I talked a little bit. I found some of the outerwear that really clinched the waist and was kind of really bulky and kind of about the male form relatively interesting, but I think I was kind of clutching at straws with it. I felt a little bit dated.
Yes.
But not in a conscious way. You know when Calvin Klein is like brilliantly dated?
Yeah.
But this felt like,
I just don't think it was precise enough. I always consider the legacy of Jil Sander to be such a precise collection, from a collar to a shirt length to the way something's tucked in.
Or even like
this was just
being
messy.
Kind of like, you know, looking like a sweatshirt, but like being really kind of, you know.
And it's not going to jump off the page, and I don't know any celebrities that I dress that would want to wear it, and so, God.
What did you make of it too?
You know, I found it pleasant, you know, pleasant enough.
Yeah.
It didn't really pick me up. It didn't really bring me down. And you know, that's a shame. You know, like you said, Catherine, like, you know, you take any of these pieces away, and you know they look great on, and you know, maybe
Yeah, absolutely.
You know.
It is a shame because the women's wear did have a real vision. I felt like the women's wear was really beautiful, which is perhaps natural because his background is more women's wear. But I felt like
it's a really hard act to follow. I mean, like
God,
the past of the brand is incredible. I mean, you know, so it's kind of like, you know, where do you go? I mean, they probably would have been better off just trying to be, you know, be a bit Gucci about it.
Yeah.
It was quite a small collection as well, wasn't it? I felt as if they were like, that'll do. Yes.
It was weird because it was small, but it wasn't very edited. It wasn't like, it didn't even feel like palette cleansing enough.
I that's why it's all over the place in terms of where to place it. Where you say it's impossible to write about because I don't know what to say about it really.
No.
Yeah,
it's
but other than that, it was great.
Yeah.
Way harsh.
Yes, maybe it's 7 out of 7 out of 10.
Yeah.
Oh, we should have those placards, shouldn't we?
Yes.
Should we talk about Bottega Veneta, because this was one of my favourite
Yes.
shows from Milan, and I thought it was so beautiful. I think
What
it's
did
really,
you like about it? What was your favorite thing about it? Why did you?
I just thought it was really sensual, and I think it's really interesting because I felt like, you know, I think he just does casual in a really, really interesting way, and I really like this idea of like, I felt like there was a real story this season of clothes worn and loved, like this, like, which is obviously ironic when they're new clothes and really expensive new clothes. But I do find that idea of kind of like celebrating
The
clothes.
elasticated waist trouser.
But you know, this idea of like, and I love that idea of kind of the poor aristocrat. It reminds me of, you know, those really, really rich British, you know, the richest people where they've been rich for years and years and years and their clothes are always absolutely terrible. I felt like this kind of riffed on that
You know,
in a really great way.
I thought it just seemed a little less uptight.
Yeah, it's what I mean.
Like,
it was kind of seductive.
somehow he was relaxing a little bit, you know, and I thought that was refreshing in a sense.
Yeah,
Because everything's always like that.
He's
you know.
so uptight normally. Can we look at the first look? I mean, the music was Marilyn Manson, which is not what you would expect, but like a brilliant idea for like a Sunday morning. Look number one is a guy called Conan. I've never seen a long-haired guy in a Bottega show.
Yeah.
It's just really, really refreshing.
Yeah.
So from the casting to the way that it didn't build up in dark colours, and it was almost like there was pops of colour all the way punctured throughout the whole collection. It's kind of quite amazing.
The best thing was the way their boxes have been pulled up above the trousers so you could see
I did like the colour.
Yeah,
I did like the colour burst, you know, really.
And there's some great
came
styling
out.
details. There's a little collar on the left that pokes out, and it looks so accidental, but it's not. But it was,
there you go.
was,
Exactly.
Yeah.
you know,
Exactly
it
that.
followed through quite a few looks.
I just think it was really, really, it felt really modern because I don't think people, I think, you know, there's so much talk about like dressing down, normcore, blah, 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 but I felt like this was a much more intelligent way of thinking about the way people actually like to dress, and I just don't think it feels that exciting to look that together. I think even people with tons and tons of money like this idea of looking.
But there was a lot of that in London as well,
nonchalant.
that kind of like thrown together, but very, very beautiful, layered and stuff.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. I felt like lots of designers did a similar thing to this, which was this idea of, you know, celebrating clothes that look really well worn. And I think that's just a really nice idea. I mean,
I thought that just the colour was so unexpected for Bottega as well.
Yeah.
Just spattered throughout. They were like, and, you know, you'd suddenly be looking at something very.
I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it a lot.
I thought it was a really good start to the Sunday, and usually everyone's a little bit sort of worse for wear on that Sunday
so
morning.
early, isn't it? It's like 9:30 in the
It's the hangover show, and
Such a hard life we have, isn't it?
You wouldn't know about that.
Sitting there watching fashion shows.
But it's interesting because I do feel like, we talk about it being really unexpected, but I do feel like this is a trajectory that Bottega have been on for a little while. You know, I felt like the Dancer collection, you know.
The Dancer collection was nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
There, but it was still very, like, restrained, slouchy.
Yeah.
Still the posture was there.
And even the
still,
idea of a
the
dancer,
hair
like
was
training,
there.
you know,
Yeah.
But the
vigorous.
casting was a
Yeah.
very different thing for Vino. That's
Yeah.
where it kind of started. It was like a healthier
That's
kid.
Freddie.
I know.
Freddie.
And
He's
then
been
to
about.
end on like an old classic
Yes,
Prada model was
I
kind of
know.
amazing.
I was really pleased to see Freddie in his pink mallow trousers.
But that's what I mean, it's kind of like, you know, that way that like really, 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 really rich people dress, where they just look,
Yeah.
they wear that
Yeah, they do,
outfit,
yeah.
that is the outfit they wear, and like,
Absolutely.
I love it though.
It's Saturday lunch.
No, it's very, but I like that in a way, I really love seeing that. I thought it was a really nice season for that in a way, you know, some of these clothes that did feel like in tune to the luxury shopper without kind of like fetishizing him, you know, sometimes it's like really together and polished. I'm like, no one is like that.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
And it was like, this is what he wears. He
Yeah.
would always wear this
He
when we
would-
went to the
exactly.
shops. And like, no.
Well, it's also the thing about like the designer, and there's still a few brands and designers who do this, where it's like, you know, you wear that and you are that man. But even like Versace, for example, it was Versace man, but not really Versace man.
Yeah.
So it's
Versace
kind
was
of,
a weird show.
Should we go to Versace?
Should we
Yeah,
go
you
to
mentioned Versace, so I don't think we have it open, but I also thought, just one last thought on Bottega. I found it interesting because I thought, you know, like this labelless luxury thing that's like obviously like everything they're about. I feel like it's quite, just thinking about how luxury is progressing, what luxury means, what is luxury, blah, blah, blah. But I thought this was quite an interesting extension of that. So rather than having it kind of super polished, labelless luxury, to kind of think about the luxury of clothes that have like, yeah, that you can't replace and that are really great, and how that kind of is that, you know, that unidentifiable quality that something has that you really adore and you've had for ages. And that felt like an interesting extension of that idea to me.
Yeah, you know it's a beautiful piece. You're not quite sure where it's from.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
I know it's going to be a.
that kind of like nonchalant, but I think that was really interesting. So Versace, what did we all make of this?
I was really surprised by it. I don't know whether I was surprised in a good way or a bad way, because I quite like seeing all the cod pieces and the like fun things. Because
We
sorry,
want a
just think
show.
that
We want a
I
show.
just you want to show.
Give us
You
a
go
show.
to Versace
The
for a
fishnet
big old
underwear
show.
It's daily life for me.
I mean, the suit shape is exactly the same. It's just a different, you know.
I felt the
different
suit was a bit
fabrication.
different. I felt like the jacket was a bit short. I was trying to.
But the shoulder's really long, and the lapel's still the same,
Yeah.
very deep.
But I'm not.
The
I
wide
don't know.
trouser.
I'm not sure who is the Versace businessman, and I think, why start a show with all those business suits when really you're
Yeah.
known for flashy jackets, print, and you
Yeah.
know they built up to that a little bit. But it's like those are the pieces we want to see and
Well,
shoot.
it's really interesting trajectory, isn't it? Because Versace, like, I feel like the menswear did this for a while, and then Donatella made that big thing where she, you know, Alex wrote a really great piece, Alex Fury in The Independent, about it. How she kind of said how she wasn't liking what was going out there, so she kind of took it, and that's when it became kind of crazy again, and we had all
Yeah.
the cod pieces and the fishnets, and then this felt like it was kind of going back a little
Yeah.
bit and a bit more. It's interesting that we're talking about colour with Bottega though, because I felt like that was one of the interesting things with Milan, other than Prada, was it was a really good season for colour, and I did think some of the colours in this were really interesting, because they're very Versace, but
I just don't think
almost a little
she
bit unexpected.
gets menswear at all. Because I love a Versace dress. She just, you can see it, she just loves it.
Yeah.
And I think that she just doesn't understand what should be going on, and it feels as if because it changes, you know, like this every season. It's sort of indicative of her sort of a bit. Okay,
Yeah.
we'll do that. Okay, that's probably what he'd wear. But I don't think she's kind of has
There's
much
not the
conviction.
yeah.
No.
I'm surprised that they're not trying to play more into the kind of ironic thing that's going on in fashion. You know, you think if they wanted to attract a younger shopper, that whole like ironic Moschino thing. I know they couldn't do something
That's
as
what I thought.
outlandish.
Or felt that they were kind of doing for like
Yeah,
a
for a
couple of
while.
seasons. It was just okay, great. Like just turn the
The
dial up
shirts came
Yeah.
and
and bring it back to the full Versace effect, and then it's now kind of come down again, like
To a butterscotch leather jacket.
We
But
know
again-
fan.
Got my name on that one.
But maybe they do, you know, as all businesses, they have to have the seasons where they're like, okay, we've done 3 seasons of it being over the top and fun, and we need to shift some
I'm sure
stuff.
it's like CEO talking.
Yeah.
And also, it's like, I think they're such a spring summer brand, aren't
Yeah.
they? Like,
Yeah,
you know,
definitely.
It's like,
Which is unusual for menswear as well.
It
so,
really
yeah.
is unusual, which I think is part of the problem. Is like we all say, oh, we look forward to Versace, but then you do look forward to seeing all the naked guys, and it's hard to do that in winter.
Yeah.
No, you do. Like, I don't mean in a weird way, like look forward to perving on a man. I more just mean like that's their aesthetic. And okay, I'm going to move on. Embarrassing. So we haven't talked about Zegna, which I think is a really interesting one to talk about.
Yes.
I love what Stefano Pilati does. I think it's really, really interesting. I think there were some real odd moments in this collection, like that jumper that had the built-in cap. Did you see that?
I didn't see that.
Oh my god! It was
Where was
like.
that?
So I was like looking at it and I was like, you can't really see it in the pictures because they're front on, but there was a knit.
Is it at the back?
And it was a cap and it was worn like a hood, but it was like almost like a helmet. It was really structured.
But was that like kind of like Ferragamo, like the animals knitted into the...
I can't talk about Ferragamo.
We'll go there later.
I'm just trying to picture it.
there,
I'm
but
trying
it
to
was
picture it because
like-
I missed it completely. the
It was
cat.
like,
So
not
it's
to
a
sound
cat.
horrible, but you know those like cushions that you can buy that have like appliques of cats on them and they're really scary? Which you have many of, which I know you collect. It was like that vibe, you know, it was like these like weird. I just like,
I didn't get that. I missed that whole thing.
it's just like weird.
Totally missed that. Thank God.
It's okay.
But yeah, that was the. But other than the cap jumper situation, are you trying to show us?
I mean, I think there's.
Oh,
is
no,
this
that's
the
not
cat
it.
jumper? Oh yes, wrapped around his waist.
Oh, there it
yeah,
is. There it is.
But it was.
So was that inbuilt?
It was inbuilt.
Was it inbuilt?
Styling.
Yeah.
Yes.
But other than this, I think it's really interesting what he does there, and I think he does have a real point of view. But I know he
Completely.
really divides opinion.
He
There's
does.
that thing though about like going back to that wearability fact, like luxury wearability. I think that there's a lot of this. I mean, when you see it, the clothes they're so beautifully made. I mean, the couture and the Ermenegildo Zegna couture brand, it's there. It exists. You see it kind of walk past you. A lot of people have criticized it not being enough of a collection, enough of a show, but they're beautiful things, and he has beautiful taste, and
And he has
and I always, I mean, the show was I think maybe I was a little bit more sidetracked by the forest.
It was
And
really
the
interesting.
setting
'Cause did you read the
was
show
really amazing.
notes where it was they are going to replant the trees? I should say that, but it's all about like sustainability
I know.
and then
It's
they
a little
like
bit like
chop
Karl
down these
Lagerfeld
trees.
bringing in the iceberg, though, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
a little bit like shipping in the iceberg and then having to ship it back. And this is my statement of eco, blah blah blah. But
Yeah.
Because didn't he
really.
do a lot of research up in to do get the Harris tweed?
Yeah.
That was in the Outer Hebrides, and then he changed it by sort of making them out of silk and cashmere and making them really luxurious, which is not
Zegna-sized. Zegna-sized.
Yeah, exactly. Which is a wonderful thing that a luxury house can do. So I don't know why it becomes that sort of sustainability thing.
But that's just a tag
Because,
in fashion,
yeah.
isn't it? It's interesting, actually. Sorry, that you said something, David. You mentioned the couture thing, and I want to bring that up because it's something we're seeing more and more of with menswear. You see it with Valentino, and here this notion of tagging menswear as like couture. What do we think of that? Because I don't think no one really knows what to make of it. 'Cause is it couture? Why is it couture?
It's not really shown in a kind of precious couture
No,
way
it's
like it is in
not.
Paris, but when you see most of the collection, it's apparent that it's there.
But what's there? Is it just? Did you just mean like the craft, the time?
kind of craft and the kind of the way it's made and the
Yeah.
fabrication and things like that. I mean, I don't know if it's. I think it's a little bit like it's a bit rich trying to use the word. I'm surprised the French actually haven't kind of
Yeah,
controlled use of couture as a word, like AOC or something.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know. I guess I think it's unnecessary to put it in. But I do.
Do you think men would respond to it? Is it something, if you wrote about it in your titles, if you mentioned, is it something that men would be like, oh great?
It sounds too girly.
I think it sounds quite fair.
Yeah.
A lot of men might be put off it.
What do you, Andrew? You're smirking at me. You keep smiling.
I think Valentino men's is almost like couture, I think. I mean, it's shown in a couture venue almost. The fact that it's a few more looks in a couture show. There's embroidery, there's all the techniques used in couture, and I think, they are a couturier as well, that branched into menswear. I don't think we're ready for couture men's fashion week. But I think, if you look at a lot of London designers, it's almost like couture because those kids have made it all themselves by hand. They haven't got the factory support that everybody else has.
What did you think of that? Is that up your street?
I didn't see them, Looks great though. Love they're going to plant the trees again, that's a good bit.
Yeah. think they are going to replant the trees?
I also think because he's got quite a very strong point of view, he sort of almost kick-started this new soft silhouette, which has been rumbling through for the past few seasons, and I think it's kind of his cut, is his sort of slouchy thing, which he has.
It's like the most expensive form of easy kind of there is.
Yeah.
Because they've got the mills and they make the cloth for everybody else as well. They've got the sort of the financial clout to just kind of go with it.
Yeah, it's a brand. It's like the might is terrifying.
Yeah.
Why do you think it does? Because it does divide opinion. Why do we think that is? David.
I think that people don't think it's special enough, and I like to view as a show.
Yeah.
And I do understand that, but I'm so touched by when I see it and touch it later that I don't really care how it's shown in a way. I mean, I just as easily see it in a presentation, to be quite honest with you. But I do love it. I really, really love it. Like, the clothes and the garments and touching it and the fabric and everything. But I mean, maybe as a show, I think it's maybe divided because it's not really, it's very subtle. It's not really kind of showing off. I mean, without the trees and the heaps of earth and stuff. I mean, it could be an Italian brand showing in Milan.
He always does divide opinion though, doesn't he?
Yeah,
he did when
absolutely.
he was at Yves Saint Laurent as well.
Yeah.
And always was sort of accused of making it too feminine. And
I did quite love what he did at Saint Laurent though.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
I think it was really, really beautiful.
I think it's good that the opinion's divided. I mean, it just stirs up.
Absolutely.
Especially at a house like
hate
Zegna
it.
as well.
People are kind of,
which never did.
Exactly. I think it is also interesting what you were saying about the kind of that looser silhouette and that kind of like that oversized and kind of draping. I think that's a really interesting thing to happen in menswear and to see in a sort of in the way that he does it. I find intriguing, and I think it has had a massive impact.
Massive.
I think definitely, which I think people don't perhaps acknowledge enough. The influence of that.
Is the couture tag just to kind of like separate also what where Zegna was, and then just to try and make them.
I think a little bit. I think it was trying to, because they spent a lot of time, even with the Zegna Sport merge. I think there was a bit of trying to just reassess what everything was about, which is I just find that couture tag really. It's not something that I would know enough about.
It's quite a mouthful. I don't.
Yeah, I just don't know how a man would respond to it. I don't know. I wonder. It's interesting thinking of something like Esquire, whether if you wrote that, a guy would be like, oh great, whether they'd see that as something attractive. It's really strange.
I don't think they would.
Because you think, who is it for? Is it for the fashion community? Is it for... Yeah, it's a strange one.
It's good for roomy celebrities though.
It is for good. Roomy, yes. I don't have a problem because all the shows since he's been there have been really dark.
Yeah.
And I find it quite sort of, and I just think it's really
It's
oppressive
for
actually quite beautiful shapes and cloths, and I can't
really see them. I think it's because he's trying to make it seductive, but it doesn't feel particularly optimistic when you're there.
Yeah, it does feel heavy. There's a heaviness.
But maybe that's his way of making it feel more masculine, because people have talked about it being too feminine before. Maybe that's a way of trying to make it a little bit more kind of
butch.
Yeah.
And hopefully he's watched this.
We've got some good tips.
There'll be neon.
Notes.
There's a few people we haven't talked about. I'm conscious of time, but we haven't discussed Calvin Klein. We haven't talked about Dolce.
Calvin was gorgeous.
Fendi. Yeah, let's talk about Calvin Klein.
Really beautiful.
You're a big fan, aren't you?
Massive fan.
Why do you like it so much?
It's the most beautiful fabrication, but also the technical sportswear element for me is great, not only from a styling point, but it's things that I'd want to wear. And when you buy a cagoule from Calvin or a Pico, it's just so well made, and it could have been made by a sportswear brand.
Yeah,
the fact
the technical obsession is
which I love that he does and stuff. I love the really heavy shoe, and then inside the shoe is like a sock that zips into it, like a scuba sock.
Sweaty. Why is there that there?
I just think it's a styling thing, wasn't it? Because all the trousers stopped at the top of the boot and stuff, and it was to give like a toughness to it.
I think this is one of his strongest collections recently.
Yeah, brilliant.
Well, I thought it was interesting because those obsession sweaters that happened, and I felt like that was such a hit, and I was intrigued to see what he did kind of, not to better that obviously, but I felt like
it was good to pull the plug on it though.
Yeah, I agree.
It was nice to see, and then it's like, okay, move on.
Otherwise it becomes, what's the next gimmick?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
she does that.
Whereas
when
it wasn't like
died
that
to death
at all. Yeah. No, I thought it was.
I mean,
lovely.
it was 50 Shades of Grey, wasn't it? It was like greyish.
But then there was also the black shiny, so it was
There it
literally
is.
50
Yeah,
Shades
we
of Grey.
liked
It was
that.
very fetishy.
And then there was the animal print and stuff as well, which I thought was beautiful.
Yeah, that print was beautiful.
But also it's not just one proportion, you know, it's a 3/4 length coat, but then it's a cropped jacket. There's something there for everybody.
Actually, those jackets look amazing
Yeah,
from
they do.
here.
Yeah.
But I remember being a bit scared of them, actually seeing them walking down the catwalk because they're so high. They don't look
they
as
look
high.
really high
They
on
were,
the
they
show.
were
I was
like
excited by
here.
them. I thought they were amazing.
It's interesting though, because I always look at it and I wonder, and I don't mean this as a criticism, but I wonder how much it has like a fashion relevant, because it does always feel like a little outside of what everyone else is doing, and it feels very much kind of like about his own obsessions and his own reinterpretations of the brand, which I quite like. It's kind of interesting, but it kind of does seem to exist in its own universe.
But there's a lot of brands that do that, but
I
Calvin
quite like
Klein does
that.
it very well. We all still really like to see it,
Yeah.
and you know, it inspires us. It's still very, very much to Calvin. There are other brands that do it, and sometimes you know, you like the collection, sometimes you don't so much.
Yeah.
But there are people at the brand that have worked there since Calvin was there,
Yeah.
and Italo was one of them. There was a crossover time when he was there. The people that do CK all worked for Calvin, and even when the ad campaigns are shot, there are these people that have got this Calvinized version of what should and shouldn't happen and stuff, and they kind of recorrect stuff. And out of all the brands that have got new designers in after the designer's been replaced, this is the most successful brand there is out there. It's like on every level, it sells from jeans, underwear, eyewear, diffusion. It's like crazy, so it works somehow.
I think it's difficult for a house like Calvin Klein, isn't it, as well? Because talking about all those different layers, I think people have these all these different associations. Like some people see it as being very macho, some people see it as being very androgynous, some people see it as being very sexy, others as very stoic. And I think it's really interesting to see. I even find it interesting when you talk to different people who are at the show, just different journalists of different ages, different buyers or stylists, and how everyone has their own idea of Calvin Klein. And often it does depend on like what fragrance you bought or whether you wear the underwear or not. And I think that's what it's quite lovely in a way, because it is kind of a brand, and it's the most to analyse a collection as a brand is interesting.
What I like about this is that, you know, you can look at that immediately and you know it's Calvin Klein. So it is, you know, it is upsetting when, you know, if a collection can veer off into what are they trying to say here, and it's immediately apparent that this is very much of the house, and this particular one is a particularly strong one.
I mean, my criticism is that I don't really seem to see it enough outside of the fact that I see it in Milan.
Yeah.
You know, I don't actually shoot it that much. I find it quite hard to access. I find it quite like you don't really see it in stores. Or am I completely like oblivious? I'm not going.
I think what you see is in Selfridges in Manchester, and they buy very basic elements from this collection, but still almost not the kind of showpiece animal print coat, but they'll buy a car coat or you know, a crop jacket.
I think they could really sell the collection.
Is that what it's about for that house?
Well, it's
though,
not.
You know?
It's not at all.
Such an
but
interesting
it's a
time
shame
thinking about.
because
Yeah, it is
it's
a
a really
shame.
nice collection consistently, where you could really imagine buying, you know, a lot of stuff from it.
It's a really interesting time for pondering the point of fashion shows and collections, I think, because, you know, there was the Jean-Paul Gaultier thing when he stopped doing ready-to-wear to focus on his couture, which is basically, you know, to continue selling his perfumes. Then Victor and Rolf announced the same this week, that they're going to stop doing ready-to-wear. And I think it is like, it's one of the, perhaps not talked about enough in fashion, how much collections are there to sell lipsticks and perfumes. And for a while that was what the couture shows were for, and now it kind of, the ready-to-wear shows, as fashion becomes more and more democratic and more reported, they serve that function as well, and it is interesting to think about it like that when you're looking at a collection.
And the importance of the live stream, and
oh my god, completely.
How long will the live, the actual live show be viable for a lot of brands, because they're so expensive to do?
Yeah,
and
but
going into
I
that,
think it's replaced the advert. You know, it's really strange now. You think the show is seen by so many people, and the imagery from the show is. It's so much just as important as the final advert, I think, now. And I think brands see it more and more like that. Because if you're going to be so widely seen, you want your message to be as crystal clear and as edited and as
like
beautiful
hits,
as your... What do you say, sorry?
It's about hits and
Yeah,
followers
exactly.
and, you know.
Yeah. Should we talk about Dolce or Fendi?
Fendi.
Fendi. Well, Dolce was same as usual, wasn't it? It was business as usual.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is nice. What did you think of Fendi? Why are you keen to talk about Fendi?
I kind of get that guy. I think I really like the fact that it's, you know, it's not crazy fashion, and it's super luxe. It's, you know, it's a crocodile coat. It's.
I mean, I think last season was a glitch.
Yeah, last season was because it was all about ordinary and it was really strange and very, you know, being boring
and the accessories are unbelievable. It's like a shaved mink apple and a smiley face pom pom, but they're brilliant, and they're the things that are going to sell.
Yeah.
And the bags with the mohawks.
My problem with this particular show, which I think was my least favourite actually, was not so much the clothes, which were beautiful. I was at that point in the day, which is kind of, you know,
I need you to drink.
No, I thought this was a difficult moment for me.
After Harmony Cafe across the street.
No, I felt
Too
at
many
that
teas.
point, I thought it's the same setup, it's the same lighting, it's the same music. I have switched off.
They played the same music that was it that Marnie were playing in the showroom or something? It was
Just
like,
drove me
Panda
mad.
Panda they played, wasn't
The
it?
whole thing.
Yeah.
And at that point, I got a bit
like
irritated.
these trousers with the pockets.
What I liked is, you know, their monster thing that everyone's obsessed with. I felt like the whole collection was about like a monster trying to escape through the clothes, because, you know, there was like fur coming out from the seams and everything was like a bit bonkers. It felt like trying to make it. Well, I'm a writer, you have to think of
Allergic reaction
something.
to
It was like my
parmesan.
57th review of the season or something. I was like, give me
Isn't
something
that
to write.
cough medicine? Cough medicine vibe.
I do think that, you know,
There it is, there it is.
yeah, but there was
There's
coats where you
monster.
put up the hood and it made you into a little monster, and I thought it was quite a sweet ethos, which is how it was like quite calm, but then there's this notion of it being a little bit silly, but kind of discreetly silly, where the silly elements are just kind of coming out. No one agrees with me. I think
No,
it's
I was in a bad
genius.
mood at that point.
Mrs. Prada
I
was
just
with
like-
me.
Couldn't find your driver.
No, I thought that was I think there were a lot of shows in Milan like that, where it seems to me they use the same production company, and it just feels quite samey.
That
And
happens in Milan though.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know, that you
Boy,
kind
oh
of,
boy,
like,
does
sift
it.
through. You know.
Yeah.
But it's difficult because, you know, you're going to shoot a lot of grey for 6 months, aren't you? So that when you see
Yes.
that purple Bottega jumper, that's where you jump out of your seat.
Yeah.
Well, this is interesting because this leads us to quite a good kind of rounding up of what advice would we give to Milan then? Was this a strong season? What did it make us think Milan should be doing better? What does it make us think Milan does really well?
I think grey to me is recession dressing, and I don't think they should be promoting that that's really struggling. I think they need to promote their technical skills and their craftsmanship, but also embrace a little bit more colour.
Embrace all the things they do well, and just
Yeah.
kind of sort of, we say this on, you know, the New Gen committee is to anyone who's having a difficult season, it's like go back to the drawing board and try and enjoy this bit, and just to enjoy
What you're about.
the moment, and not to worry that.
And
but
make grey clothes, but
Yeah.
just put them for the sales agents to deal with and to sell to stores, not for us to look at.
Would you agree with that, David?
No.
No.
Yes.
Thank you, David.
Yes.
What would your advice to Milan be? Or do you think it doesn't need any advice?
Well, you know, it's the business of fashion in Milan, and you've got the big brands, and you've got the manufacturing, you've got the factories, and everything's kind of in place. If anything, I think Milan should just try to find a little bit more inspiration. Because for us, seeing show after show after show, you kind of, I mean, there might be a really great collection in front of your eyes, but you kind of get blurred quite easily because you have a lot of tailoring, and it's kind of heavy. It's quite like, and so you kind of, you know, you look at a show like, you know, Gucci, and you kind of, you think a little, or you think, oh, because it's giving us something.
change production companies. Or
You just want some good music and some nice lighting.
Yes.
So you kind of get that kind of like, I don't know, like kind of style, like W Hotel bar music in the shows and stuff. And it just needs to be a little bit more cool, I think, overall.
They just need us. We should just take over.
It's made it quite difficult for them because they now have to follow London, which is kind
absolutely.
of.
It's such a
And I
bad
think
But they don't
actually
have-
some shows don't need to be shows.
No.
Absolutely.
They can be a presentation.
Yeah.
Well, we've had that discussion for a while now. It's like all those beautiful tailoring companies moved from Pitti in Florence, and they now show in Milan, and they don't need to.
No.
I'd rather see a a
I
presentation
think it's
somewhere.
this odd thing of trying to. It's interesting you talk about London because I think they're trying to compete with London in quite a naive way of being like, okay, we'll have more shows, we'll do rather than being like, okay, what are we about?
Yeah.
So London has loads of shows that are all really exciting. We'll do really great presentations and talk about the craft. You know, it's just about
because we can't compete on the level of luxury that they are able to just produce it because they all own their own factories and we want to have everything made there anyway. So it's just celebrating that. That's what you're good at. That's what we would come to see. The big budget luxury thing.
But for all that in Milan, and even that, like the big brands in Paris, I actually thought that London is like, scrubbed up really well to everybody else.
I love that little push for London.
I know. I kind of like on this note, I'm just going to say, let's just hear it from London because you went to Milan and you're kind of like sloppy waiting around. It's like London is just like really really professional.
No, it is.
And who would have thought?
They need to watch out. They need to up their game. There's always Prada though, so it's fine. Well, shall we give all the designers a round of applause for this season, but especially Gucci and Prada, because I think they gave us a lot of food for thought, and that's what fashion should be about.
Exactly.
So, should we give them a clap?
Yeah.